There is a strange kind of pain that almost everyone experiences, yet very few people talk about honestly. It begins after the goodbye, not during the arguments, not in the silence that slowly grew between two people, not even on the day everything finally ended. It begins later. On an ordinary afternoon, when a phone lights up with a notification that isn't from them, when a familiar song starts playing in a supermarket, when someone laughs in a way that sounds almost identical to theirs. Without warning, the mind quietly wanders back to someone it already knows brought more pain than peace. And for a brief moment, one uncomfortable question appears. Why do I still miss them? It doesn't seem to make sense. The relationship may have been filled with broken promises, sleepless nights, or conversations that always ended with one person apologizing and the other walking away. Friends may have sighed with relief when it was over. Even the person who was hurt may have admitted, deep down, that leaving was the right decision. So why does part of the heart still hesitate? Why does it still replay old conversations, revisit familiar places, or wonder how life might have been if things had turned out differently? It is an experience that often feels confusing, even embarrassing. People rarely admit it out loud because they fear what it might say about them. They wonder if missing someone means they made the wrong choice. They wonder if it means they are weak, or worse, if all the pain somehow wasn't as real as they remember. But what if none of those conclusions are true? What if missing someone is not a verdict, but a process? Imagine a traveler who has walked the same path every day for years. The road is uneven. It is filled with sharp stones. It offers little comfort, yet every turn is familiar. Every tree stands where it has always stood. The traveler could walk it with their eyes closed. One morning, another path appears. It looks calmer, brighter even, but it disappears into thick fog. No footprints, no certainty, just possibility. Most people assume the traveler would immediately choose the better road, yet many hesitate, not because the old path is kinder, but because it is known. The human mind has always carried a quiet preference for the familiar. Familiar places, familiar routines, familiar voices. Sometimes, even familiar pain. This is where the story begins to change. Because perhaps the question was never, why do I miss someone who hurt me? Perhaps the better question is, what exactly is it that refuses to let go? That answer is more complicated than love. And it begins in a place most people never think to look. Inside the quiet habits the heart builds long before it ever realizes they exist. The mind likes to believe that every choice is carefully reasoned, that it always moves toward what is best and away from what causes pain. But much of human behavior follows a quieter rule. It moves toward what is familiar. Imagine two rooms. One is dimly lit and worn. The furniture is old. The air feels heavy. Yet every corner is recognizable. Nothing inside is surprising. The other room is filled with light. It promises a fresh beginning, but everything is unfamiliar. Every sound is new. Every step feels uncertain. For many people, the first room feels strangely easier to enter, not because it is happier, because it is known. The brain is constantly trying to predict what comes next. Familiar patterns make that task easier. Even when those patterns involve disappointment, silence, or emotional distance, they require less effort than stepping into the unknown. This doesn't mean people enjoy being hurt. It means certainty can sometimes feel safer than possibility. That is why the end of a painful relationship often creates an unexpected emptiness. The pain disappears, but so does the pattern, the morning messages, the evening phone calls. Even the arguments became part of a routine the mind quietly learned to expect. Then, one day, all of it stops. The absence is louder than the noise ever was. It is easy to mistake that emptiness for proof that the relationship should return. But emptiness and longing are not always asking for the same thing. Sometimes, the mind is simply searching for a pattern it no longer knows how to complete. The relationship may end in a single conversation. Attachment rarely does. It lingers in ordinary places. A favorite cafe, a familiar street, a film that was always watched together. Even a particular time of day can awaken memories without permission. The person is gone. Yet invisible threads still connect countless moments of everyday life to them. Those threads were not created in one dramatic moment. They were woven slowly, one shared routine after another, one ordinary day after another. That is what makes them so difficult to notice, until they begin to unravel. Perhaps this is why healing rarely feels dramatic. It is not one grand act of moving on. It is hundreds of quiet moments in which the mind gradually learns that a place, a song, or a memory can exist without reaching back towards someone who is no longer there. Little by little, the invisible threads begin to loosen. Not because they are cut, but because they are no longer being pulled. And as they loosen, another question quietly begins to emerge. If attachment can outlive a relationship, can memory also change after someone is gone? That question leads to one of the mind's most fascinating habits. And it explains why the past often feels kinder than it truly was. Memory is often imagined as a library, a place where every moment is carefully stored, waiting to be opened exactly as it happened. But memory is less like a library, and more like a storyteller. Each time it revisits the past, it quietly decides which moments deserve the spotlight and which fade into the background. Think about someone looking through an old photo album. The pages are filled with birthdays, road trips, unexpected laughter, quiet evenings, and smiles captured in a fraction of a second. The photographs rarely show the long silences after an argument. They don't capture the nights spent wondering why a message never came. They don't preserve the feeling of shrinking yourself just to keep the peace. The happiest moments are easier to frame. The painful ones often disappear between the pages. The mind can work in a surprisingly similar way. When someone is no longer part of everyday life, the brain sometimes gathers the brightest memories first. Not because it wants to deceive us, but because emotionally meaningful moments are often easier to recall than the countless ordinary moments that slowly wore us down. This is why a relationship can begin to feel softer after it ends. Not because the past has changed, but because the mind is no longer experiencing all of it at once. It is replaying selected scenes, a kind message, a warm embrace, the holiday that went perfectly. Meanwhile, the broken promises, the anxious waiting, and the exhausting cycles become quieter. Not erased, simply pushed further into the background. This can create a dangerous illusion. It starts to feel as though the relationship was mostly beautiful, interrupted by only a few painful moments. But sometimes the opposite was true. Sometimes the beautiful moments were islands, surrounded by an ocean of hurt. And yet, those islands are what memory keeps returning to. There is another reason this happens. Human beings do not only become attached to people, they become attached to possibilities. Long before a relationship ends, the imagination begins writing chapters that reality has not yet reached. The next birthday, growing older side by side, the ordinary mornings that always seemed certain to come. The future quietly takes shape long before it exists. When the relationship ends, those imagined moments disappear too. But unlike real memories, they cannot be replaced. They were never lived, only hoped for. Perhaps that is why some losses feel impossible to explain. It isn't only the person who is missing, it is the life that was quietly being built around them. The conversations that were never spoken, the trips that were never taken, the ordinary days that never had the chance to become ordinary. Sometimes people believe they are grieving yesterday, when in truth, they are grieving the future that never got the chance to exist. One asks the heart to remember. The other asks it to let go of a future that existed only in hope. That is often the heavier burden. Because memories eventually settle, but unfulfilled hopes have a way of asking, over and over again, what if? That quiet question can echo for months, sometimes for years, until one day, another question arrives, a question that changes everything. Perhaps healing doesn't begin when the memories disappear. Perhaps it begins when they are finally seen in full. Not only the laughter, but also the loneliness. Not only the promises, but also the disappointments. Not only the moments that made the heart race, but also the moments that quietly broke it. Seeing the whole story doesn't make the beautiful memories any less real. It simply allows them to take their proper place. No longer larger than life. No longer powerful enough to erase everything else. Little by little, the mind begins to understand something it couldn't see before. Missing someone and wanting them back are not the same thing. One is an emotion. The other is a decision. And emotions are not instructions. They are experiences. Like waves, they rise. They stay for a while. Then, eventually, they pass. There may still be days when an old song brings everything rushing back. A familiar perfume lingers in the air. A date on the calendar stirs a memory that seemed long forgotten. That doesn't mean healing has failed. It means the mind is remembering. And remembering is different from returning. Then comes a question that only each person can answer for themselves. When you say you miss them, take a moment. Who is it that you really miss? The person who stood in front of you? The person you hoped they would become? Or the version of yourself that still believed everything would work out? That question has no easy answer, but asking it changes something. Because the moment hope and reality stop being confused with one another, the heart begins to breathe differently. The suitcase it has been carrying for so long starts to feel lighter, not because the past has been forgotten, but because it no longer has to carry a future that never arrived. The old road is still there. The memories are still there. Nothing has been erased. The difference is that they no longer decide which direction to walk. And maybe that is what moving on has always meant. Not deleting the past, not pretending someone never mattered, but accepting that missing someone is not always a sign they belong in your future. Sometimes it is simply the mind taking its final steps away from a life it spent a long time preparing for. There is no finish line. No perfect moment when every memory disappears. Only a quiet morning when the phone stays silent, and for the first time it no longer feels like something is missing. Just another day, another step, another chance to keep walking forward. If today's story helped you understand a part of yourself a little more clearly, we'd be grateful to have you join us. Subscribe to Project Human, where each episode explores the quiet truths that shape our lives, because understanding ourselves is often the first step toward living with greater peace.